go. Okay, hello everyone. Back for part 2 with my wonderful interview with Dan Willis, Disclosure Project witness, former ABC radio news correspondent and engineer. So Dan, we left off right when it was really starting to get juicy. Let's start with Marcel Vogel, because I think he's often overlooked but key individual in the play of black technology, black ops technology, curling photography he's known for, which is photographs your aura, and you could tell if somebody has a health issue with their colors are in balance. But tell us some of the other things about Marcel Vogel that you're familiar with and the things that he was kind of into. I know you mentioned a couple things in part 2. Let's kind of pick up there, if you will.
Well, I don't know about being involved with black ops. He used to say to me, and I thought it was kind of conspiratorial, he says, if we ever discover something profound in the laboratory, the government can come in and clean out our lab. And in 2001, I met with a bunch of scientists, which exactly that happened. One physicist, Mark Cummings, he had a crystal that was glowing and levitating and producing all this power, and a SWAT team came in and cleaned out his laboratory. And that story has been repeated. And I had 10 years experience of meeting with scientists and inventors after the congressional hearing was denied by the Bush administration to bring forth these scientists and so forth. In the late 70s, I had a kind of ET interaction having to do with geometry and consciousness that left a burning desire to try to understand the structure of the matrix that we're in that's related to consciousness. And of course, crystals and water are two key indicators. And so I met with him while he was still working with IBM. He invited me to be a research associate. He opened up a laboratory. IBM gave him the electron microscope. And he fully assembled himself. I helped procure it. I was working at the Naval Electronic Engineering Center for about 13 years. All the Navy's electronic equipment. So I had access to a lot of equipment that helped, like spectrophotometers and things like that, to help supplement the lab. We were quantifying these energies of mind and how it could be recorded. He was working with 24 medical doctors in the Bay Area. The first time I met him, I drove up in the middle of a storm from San Diego to San Jose, and was sitting on this couch after he invited me in with this doctor. And making a long story short, a woman came with a daughter, he's working with these doctors, and she had this tumor that was sticking about a half inch on an ankle. And in front of the doctor and I, he worked using the crystal with his technique that he developed, which has to do with breath and utilizing the crystal, and it dematerialized the tumor right before our eyes. So wow. That left a lasting impression on me. He cut this crystal as a gift for me. I went to the mines in Arkansas and got just a ton of crystals that he was cutting for these doctors. And eventually, the design evolved, and more sides started developing on the crystals.
Right.
I had a number of amazing experiences working with it, doing the techniques, even when he first gave me the first crystal. The first time I ever used it, I was going on a plane back to San Diego. And it was a football player. He was holding his knee in pain because he just had surgery in it. And I thought, oh my God, well, I've been given a gift and been trained how to use it. I said, well, I'm not a doctor. I'm kind of an experimental scientist. If you like, we can try some unusual techniques. And
sure.
He got off the plane, pointed to me from his parents. He said, that guy, he cured my leg, but I didn't cure his leg. I facilitated him in healing himself through working with the energetic fields of the body and facilitating that. And it's quite a science. I think in the not too distant future, we're going to understand just how crystals can be utilized in ways that, as Stanford Research Institute discovered, they imprint it in 3D, the image of the Mona Lisa into a crystal, and they said that the speed of which they can extract information. I think crystals are going to be a source of understanding the matrix that we are in. It's holographic. One of the projects I worked on was the Delaware camera, which was from the 1950s. We imported it, and my job was to take this camera that was patented by the European Patent Office. It took thousands of photographs that, like, say, for example, a woman was like 50 miles away and a drop of blood was tuned into her baby, that she was pregnant, and it was able to holographically project into space with this thing stood about 5.5 feet tall, the holographic image in 3D, and we were only able to capture a slice of it with a photographic plate. And what was curious about this radionic type of instrument was that it could tune forwards and backwards in the time. You could see the baby progressing and going backwards and forwards. And my job was, with my background, I studied radionics and built a number of pieces of equipment, and I have an extensive electronics background. And so at the time it was 1980s. So I was attempting to bring 1980s technology to attempt to make it real-time viewing of this holographic field that was being projected. And I heard just the last few months, I heard Alex Collier talking about what the Andromedans shared with him, that the camera, I mean, they call it, he said the Andromedans call it a camera, the medbed, where it takes a photo of you holographically. It goes back to your conception, and they can move it through time, in which the camera that I worked on substantiated these principles that they're real. That's why it was patented, and overlay that holographic pattern onto your existing pattern and age reverse you. And this is how this event that I participated in inspired a hacker in the UK, Gary McKinnon. Talked about the solar warning program that launched in the 80s, that in the year 2000, the first 20 and back, where they served 20 years on a timeline, and then our age regressed and time regressed and memories erased and back on this timeline to the point of where they were brought in. And then 20 years passes on this timeline, they start to have total memory recall. And so this is the technology that you can imagine, thousands or millions of years in advance, cultures that have shared these technologies. And what's so sad is, we could be adding hundreds of years onto our life. Any disease, complete corrupt medical, pharmaceutical corporations, everything can be completely dismantled, and centers could be set up all over the planet where people can, be relieved from suffering and of the effects of aging. I'm 73 now, so I'm getting up there. The average lifespan is 78, 79 years old, on this planet.
Right. Yeah, I'm of the opinion that our thoughts create the future, and that when we're really young and we see a pet die, or a great grandma or something dies, and you ask your parents, what is death? And it really puts your parents in an awkward situation, and they just kind of tell you, like mine did. I think it happens commonly. They say, well, don't worry about that. It happens to everybody. You don't need to cry. Grandma's in a better place, or whatever. I'm under
something's wrong with that picture, huh?
Yeah, I'm under the impression that as an impressionable young man, I was programmed, because I completely implicitly trusted my parents on any subject, that it would, without the education that I've had since, that it would take on average 79 years, let's say, for my own thoughts to kill me in some way. to manifest that future. But okay, so very interesting point. So let's stick with Marcel Vogel here for just a minute. My former Druid priestess teacher, Serona Knight, you could look her up. She was a little girl sitting in Marcel Vogel's laboratory while he ran around, did his experiments, really influenced her heavily. She used to use all kinds of crystal techniques on me. I inherited the VHS copies of his Joy Lake, I think it was, crystal workshop he had in Nevada, where he'd take this certain shaped crystal like you're holding up, double terminated, so many sides, creates different effects. You know, he'd have different shapes for different things. But he would do circles around the back of the person, and immediately their consciousness would be affected in some way. Some would pass out, and then he'd change their field and like heal different issues. So really incredible stuff. But for me, the fascinating point about Marcel Vogel, with all the interesting things about him, was that he was doing science, but yet there's a crossover with magic. Are you able to speak about the crossover between science and magic? Because I think that plays out with the Nazis as well. They were into the occult, but yet it spilled over into the science. So there's some kind of overlap there. Maybe Jack Parsons with L. Ron Hubbard at JPL doing rocket fuel experiments in the guise of a ritual. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, if you look at, if we go back in time, 100, 200 years, something like that, the things we do now appear as magic, because magic is nothing but advanced science, not fully understood yet. And we label it as magic or something that is
right.
Beyond, when we understand that the entire universe is holographic and it has a fractal tetrahedral geometry to it. Even their atomic elements of tables is based on tetrahedral geometry. And that quartz and water have this hexagonal tetrahedral geometry in it. And if you get into it, you start to find that there is a what I call angular harmonic resonance, where the water has a certain degree angles, like 26 and 104.5, and intermolecular bonding angles, and quartz is like 52 degrees. And 52 degrees is significant because it's the same angle as the Great Pyramid in Egypt, or 51 degrees, 51 minutes, 14 seconds, exactly, but roughly about 52 degrees. This 52-degree angle is related to the golden mean ratio, which is the ratio that goes into infinity. The water and the quartz, Marcel was able to do experiments where he would take a crystal and circulate with right-hand turns, about 7 turns, the water around it, and the program that was in the crystal would transfer into the water. He was able to convert thousands of gallons of this Rotgut wine in California into a California award-winning wine by being able to put the program of a more refined wine into the crystal. Of course, commercially, you couldn't really say, "Oh, this is crystal enhanced." Everybody looks at the age and everything. So there is this advanced understanding of this tetrahedral holographic reality, of which Marcel always used to expound the importance of love when you're working with the crystals, because like in Dr. Emoto's, where where love, joy versus hate, fear, and something like that, couldn't formulate the structuring in the flash freezing of the water at the moment, capturing what was going on geometrically. The matrix is such that water, quartz, the complex patterns of love are at the highest level. And so when you work with love, it has a transcending capability in order to in order to effectively heal someone when you're working with someone. You know, they say love heals. There's a lot to that.
Well, you can't go wrong with love, right? So a lot of different ways to go there. I'm really digging this interview. Thank you again. So Marcel Vogel seems to have picked up on independently on some threads that maybe the Nazis were working on as well. And you mentioned time travel and timelines, especially in part one of our interview. So did Marcel Vogel never actually got cleaned out like you're describing in part one, where Ralph Ring maybe is an example, working with Otis T. Carr, and they're flying little dish-shaped craft around in the Southern California desert. And then once the military picks up on it, they come in, clean out their thing, and then they invite them into the government's own project, according to Ralph Ring. So did anything like that ever happen to Marcel Vogel, or is that why they recruited him at IBM? Because IBM, if we know our history, International Business Machine, was a German corporation.
Oh yeah, they did the punch cards for the concentration camps,
right.
Yes, back then. Yeah, and he was rather upset that, you know, a lot of things they didn't honor for him. You know, he had hundreds of patents. He created the magnetic coating on hard drives, red and blue phosphors for color television, developed liquid crystals for displays.
Right.
And the man was an extraordinary genius. And it was his creativity that he was led into. IBM wanted to, the other total left brain engineers there, they wanted to instill some more creativity, because Marcel would work on something, he would not let up until he found the answer, and he would get information in his dreams and so forth, which, you know, the other engineers, you know, they only work within a box, so to speak. And so he had to do a course for creativity for about 30 engineers. And he saw this thing about plant experiment, you know, with plant communication. And he thought it was garbage, but then he thought, oh no, this would be good. And to set it up. And so he hooked up a split leaf philodendron to a script recorder, and he burned the leaf on the plant and saw it squiggle. And then the thought, when it formed in his mind, the moment that thought formed in his mind, the plant squiggled. You know, he said that squiggle changed his life. And so he was able to psychically tune in on the plant from 7 miles away, and then all the way on the other side of the planet, the Prague, Czechoslovakia, where he set it up with his associate and was able to psychically tune in on the plant and make it squiggle. And so he started working with pranayama, yogic breath, and discovered that when he pulsed his breath through the nostrils, he found out he had a much more dramatic response. In other words, when we breathe, it's like an information. And when we inhale and we exhale, we write information, we bring in information. We're writing information, and we're putting it out. And so when you hold the crystal, he would take it and pulse his breath like that. And he could measure that with a spectrophotometer in the 3,000 to 4,000 angstrom range. The water, when he pulsed his breath in it, would have all these extra bands in it. And then he could, with the intent to clear it, he could erase it, or take a magnetic bulk eraser and it would erase it. And so he was able to measure this and measure the effectiveness of a pulse breath. Lately, this is kind of on the fringe of things, but I did a Zoom with Elena Danan and Thorhan, who is her contact, his younger brother. He terraforms planets. His name's Jenhan. He shared I sent out a long list of questions regarding crystals, and he answered them quite profoundly, and it matches beautifully everything that Marcel discovered in the laboratory. Everything from the power of the pulse breath, why is much more effective in writing the program to how the crystals and things that grow on this planet are connected to this planetary matrix of which all of us are, because our bodies are of this earth. If you were to take a crystal on Mars, it wouldn't have the same effect, but it would have the effect on that particular planet. And so by connecting into the planetary matrix, the crystal is like a pure form of this geometric holographic matrix that we're in, that can couple or connect into the planetary matrix. And so I'm right now, I'm working on working on some visualizations that to instill a positive timeline onto the planet, because as research has been done, where people, they found that the square root of 1% on the planet affects the entire planet. Like there's 8 billion people on the planet. That's less than 9,000 people, the square root of 1%. So if you have people doing this and envisioning and putting it out there, are Hollywood and the secret societies, they villainously utilize the collective mind in order to perpetuate the reality that they want. And so it's using the magic, I guess you could say, but white magic.
Okay, that's a whole nother conversation, but you anticipated a couple of my questions already, and you segued into my next segment, which is Project Mockingbird. They want us to think what they want us to think, and they know how to get us to do that without the masses actually knowing that. That would be Arthur C. Clarke, or what you described earlier as definition of magic. There's a higher technology of public persuasion that is kind of kept from the masses. I think E.L. Bernays in America started tapping into that, maybe like Marcel Vogel's tapping into it independently. The Nazis clearly tapped into it, whether they got it from ETs or stumbled upon it through their own trial and error, I think is a matter of speculation. But Project Mockingbird, describe just how well the media can control the masses, because it seems like once I got outside that, I saw how simple of it really is, but yet it controls millions of people in this country and around the world, billions of people around the world, really. It's like magic. So let's talk a little bit about PR. The Germans set this whole thing up. So there is aliens, but the Germans, or the Fourth Reich, use the cover of aliens and alien craft to be able to infiltrate the United States. That would appear to be what it is to me. What's your thoughts?
One of my favorite subjects to get into,
right?
Because
Absolutely.
when all these explosive testimonies of these 20 witnesses were backed by over 500 military intelligence witnesses, and the 22 cameras, and the place was packed with reporters, myself being ex-ABC, I thought, how could this not be a world-changing event?
Right.
And so a media company out of Hollywood wanted me to write an article on the control of media, so with the extraterrestrial issue, and so I gladly accepted and been researching for a couple of decades. But billions of dollars go into think tanks that engineer our perceptions and to give our consent toward the agenda that they're moving forward. Nazis were very much into mind control. The Operation Mockingbird, which was set up by Allen Dulles, that they had 400 journalists, which the CIA was paying the journalists in order to disseminate the information that they wanted for the public to perceive. And instead of Eisenhower having public disclosure in May of '54, like Gerald Light said in his letter, they started the Nazi SS, Prince Bernhard, set up the Bilderberg meetings, which the Bilderbergs, along with the Council of Foreign Relations, Trilateral, control all of the 6 corporations that control 90+% of everything a lot of the public perceives. And how they do this is and you and I are both a victim of this as well as everybody else. it is a generational indoctrination, because when you're a child, your mother and father used to watch the evening news. My father used to watch Walter Cronkite, and
Sure.
no reason to question the validity. You just naturally assume there's journalists out there doing the due diligence and checking this information, and if anything was off, there would be an outcry of
That's
all
right.
these journalists coming out. But when they figured out how to centrally control all of the outlets, so it looks like you have the same information coming from multiple outlets, how could it possibly be wrong? And so as you grow into adulthood, you just naturally take that assumption and you watch the evening news and you just think, yeah, well, wow, this is what's going on in the world. But you have
Right.
no idea that the teleprompter that the newscaster is reading, is being controlled by these think tanks that are engineering exactly the perceptions that they want the public to see. And so you don't have any idea that the whole information systems, and now we have social media, which with their algorithms and everything, that you and I can't say certain words or else your YouTube will get taken down.
Right.
So they've expanded it into the internet, because they knew that the internet, thank God, through alternative media such as your channel, is getting some of this truth out there and awakening a certain amount of public, or else they would have, like in communist China, where the state controls, one channel that, only information that you see. And you get hauled away or disappear if you come up with an alternative view to the state approved information.
That's right.
And so that's the world we have today. And it's like, when you realize this truth, and the truth is revealed through history, it's like, one oh my God after another is like, oh my God, this is true. And that the people on the television screen are actually giving you information that could lead to your early demise if
That's right.
you're not paying attention.
That's right. I mean, when I first got into studying UFOs, the whole idea of going to Area 51 was really appealing to me. And then I heard of people who got too close to the border, and then the guys in the Jeep show up and they'll watch you for a little while. But then if you persist or even get closer, they come, and then it's not just harassment. People have been beaten. They've had a lot of equipment smashed or stolen, and it starts costing you a lot of money. So, it gets serious really quick. And I think what's really fascinating for me about this whole mind control thing, I think they've perfected a lot of their public relations techniques, mind control techniques, mass mind control, with this whole COVID thing. So they're not only have been experimenting on us with the weaponized viruses.
Careful your words.
Okay, well, okay. So I'm pretty low under the radar, I think, at this point, so I could get away with it now. Let me get a sponsor or two, and then I'll worry about putting the dashes in between the words and all that stuff I see people do on Facebook, right? Do the facial recognition disruptors or whatever,
Right.
But I think with COVID, not only have they been experimenting on us with weaponized viruses, not only have they been using that as an excuse to test us now and experiment on us with the vaccines, but they're also experimenting and constantly perfecting, like the other two categories, perfecting their mass mind control machine. And
well, they're not experimenting. They know exactly what it does. The plan
it's
for the
perfected
New
already.
World Order is to, reduce 90% of the population,
Right.
and the rest would be a slave force. Well, they keep this advanced technology that's been withheld. After we had the scientists willing to go forth, we stated, for open congressional hearing to prove we had 0-point energy, put it on front of the committee to show that these technologies are real and that they work. The Bush administration denied a congressional hearing. Dr. Greer had a database of about 300 scientists and inventors for 10 years. I got involved in the beginning, and it was like a nightmare of people being suicided, people getting national security orders saying their invention's been deemed to be a detriment to the national security of the United States, therefore you cannot share it with anybody. So after 10 years, I essentially gave up. So we have, ever since the Invention Secrecy Act of 1951, we've had thousands of solutions. We don't need to have rockets. They have anti-gravity, medical breakthroughs. They have, my God, anti-gravity, free energy, anything that's on that list. There's a system in the patent office that automatically issues a national security order. And so these technologies, med beds, replicators, all these advanced technologies that are in the secret space programs, they want to keep it for the elite, for them to have it, while they use what's on the earth as it's a very Nazi mentality, because when the Nazis, when they went to Antarctica and escaped, they took thousands of slaves with them, and they're very much into using slave labor. In fact, there's slave operations in our solar system that have been going on, and what's encouraging is the Artemis Accords, which is kind of like a space NATO, where everybody agrees, certain to use everything in a certain moral way, so we're not using slave labor with people and things.
Okay.
So the Nazis are very much into slavery, and so this new world order that they want to create requires that we got too many people on the planet as far as they're concerned. But if we release these technologies, remote places on the planet can be inhabited, and as far as that's concerned, there's other planets in this galaxy that can be habitated. We don't have to, reduce the population dramatically like that.
Right.
So that's basically what this is about, is to reduce
Right.
90% of the population. And if you on the webmatrix.net, if you go into a link called Nazi eugenics and big pharma, I've done extensive research into all the connections with that.
Awesome. Okay, so speaking of, here's an interesting segue. Speaking of land that's uninhabited, is there a hollow earth, and were the Nazis in on that too?
Well, there's huge caverns. It's believed it's like a honeycomb under there. Was massive
in the crust. Okay.
Yeah, that has been by different witnesses. You have Admiral Byrd's alleged story of going into the inner earth and seeing
Right.
vegetation and all this. So I have no way of substantiating that, but
Okay.
there's
Fair enough.
indications something like that. Definitely the moon's hollow. We know that.
Okay. Yeah, didn't NASA ping it, sent a sonar beam at it, and it came back as hollow? That's seems to be something I remember.
Yeah, they crashed a craft into it, I believe, and it rang like a bell for an hour. And it's made of a metallic, I forgot the composition, but as William Tompkins says, first of all, it's not a moon, and second of all, it's not our moon.
Right.
And he saw live on the TRW screen, which was getting the direct feed, the huge spacecraft lined up on this far side of the crater where Neil Armstrong, where the ham radio operators were picking up the direct feed, which means we did go to the moon, because you have to have a highly directional antenna pointing at the moon in order to pick up the signal. It says, "Oh my God, these babies are huge, sir. I'm telling you, there's other spacecraft lined up on the far edge of this crater." And so they basically warned them off the moon back in 1969 and allowed them to do a few more, and then that was it. It was like crickets after that, and a lot of people wonder why we didn't go back to the moon.
Okay, so just the last little quick thing, I just got a new book by Peter Moon and Doug Dietrich about the Japanese and their whole kind of role in the UFO thing having to do with World War II, but that there was an alliance between the Japanese and the Germans, and that
Right.
they supposedly flew to the moon. Are you aware of that? Can you just talk about that briefly?
There's something along that line. I don't have a lot of information on that, but I was researching the submarines that were sunk during World War II. That one was going to Japan, and it was filled with tons of mercury. And we know that the mercury is what they used in the anti-gravity engines.
Okay.
Then they were sharing that with the Japanese. And another one was up by Norway, which is starting to leak, causing an environmental issue, like I think 67 tons of mercury in sealed glass containers. That's a lot of thermometers.
Yeah,
you
that
know,
stuff's toxic. Yeah.
and we know that the Vermana of ancient India, which the Nazis were all over, India, Tibet, and looking at ancient scripts, the Heinrich Himmler, that they used mercury engines, and the Hanabu used mercury engines, and the TR-3B. I sat down in the Hilton with Mark McCandish, my witness friend, who was suicided last year, who was going to
God bless him.
testify. That he went over the alien reproduction vehicle, which he testified and did the exact detailed drawing. He showed that the center column had a mercury column, which was a Tesla configuration around it that created a mass canceling effect of these alien reproduction vehicles, ARVs, that were made back in the 1950s, that can go faster than the speed of light. And so when they came out with the June 2001, 2021 rather, report saying we don't have any technology that we know of that can do such things, which was kind of curious that Mark was met with a shotgun to the head 1 week after Mike Tuber, a former Air Force intelligence specialist, went public and said that his testimony 2 years ago, that the Tic Tac that everybody knows about, on the 2017 from the Nimitz and from the Navy jet picking it up on the display, was actually made by Lockheed in California. It can go 24,000 miles per hour and 500 miles per hour under the ocean. And so what do these two, he came back and said, oh, I made the whole thing up, right? Why would you do that? Very suspiciously. And then 1 week later, Mark is suicided, who was going to testify at the Senate hearing. Both of these testimonies reveal that indeed, we do have these technologies that can perform in this manner. And so if you were going to say, pull off like Wernher von Braun, pull off a alien false flag invasion in the future, you wouldn't want the public to know that you have this stuff to be able to pull it off.
You'd want them to think it's aliens, right? Okay, so real quickly, what is the solution to all this for us helpless, seemingly helpless, trapped masses? How do we get ourselves out of this?
Disclosure is like becoming awake, and the more of the public becomes awake, the more of it's like the morphogenic field we're all connected into. I see we have less than 1 minute, and boy, the time just flew by.
It does.
Bret.
Okay, so all right, so we're going to wrap this up here. Can you stay on the line for just a minute so we can just talk for a minute after I stop this here? Okay, Dan Willis, thank you so much for your time. That ends part 2. I can have a feeling at some point in the future, there's going to be other episodes with Dan Willis. You are a vast chasm of information, my friend. And in the end, I think the Disclosure Project is going to be seen as a pivotal moment in time that maybe we don't even see the ramifications of it now, but in the future, we're going to. And you being a part of that, I think you're going to be considered a hero. So I don't mean to flatter you too much, but nice job. And we'll